With this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to mark the doll in preparation for making slopers for her. Like most collectors, I have a variety of dolls. Even though many are roughly the same height, their dimensions vary greatly, even within the same doll family. Slopers are the basic pattern from which all other patterns are made. Through manipulation, you can create patterns for many types and styles of garments for your doll. No matter the size or shape, we begin by marking the doll.
So let's get started. I'm using embroidery yarn that you find in those little packets. Okay, one is largely enough. I've got scissors and tape. Use a tape that's not going to leave any residue on the doll body. First thing I do is I'm going to mark her center front and her center back. So one piece of yarn I tape down, and I tape it down the center of the doll. I'm going to turn her around, and then I bring it back up to mark the center back. Next, I'm going to mark her bust line. So you find the widest part of her bust, and we'll tape it down and then go all the way around, trying to keep this as straight as possible to the back. And then we'll tape down. Now we're going to mark her waist, and once again, the smallest part of the waist. And then tape down. Now we're going to mark her hips. So I start at the widest point. I'd start in the back, might be easier. And then bring the tape around the widest part of her hips. Okay. It should be parallel to what's happening at the waist and the bust. So when you are finished, it should look something like that, except that's a little bit. Let's try to straighten that out. What you want to do is to really try to get these as straight as possible so that the end pattern will be as accurate as possible. Now, we're going to mark her neckline, and you must imagine what like a top would look like on her. And so that will be our neckline. From that point, all the collars will also originate. We can clip these little pieces off later, but try to get a nice oval around her neck. Now, next we must mark her armholes, and remember that the sleeve will be set into this armhole, so we don't want it to be too tight around the arm, because we have to understand that there'll be seam allowance. So I'm marking it down almost to the bust, but not quite. A little bit up. Let's see, I'll make it so you can see a little better. And I bring it around the arm, but I don't put it on the crack with this doll where the arm joins. I bring it a little bit off onto the shoulder, and then around the back. And again, trying to keep that oval as clean as possible. Nice oval. Now we need to mark her side seam. So I'm putting another piece of yarn right at the base. The doll, most dolls have a seam here anyway, and you can follow that. So my seam goes to the waist and then down to the hips. When I turn her in the front, you see it's really tracing her silhouette, and you see this in the back as well. Okay, we're not finished yet. We need to mark her shoulder. So a small piece of yarn that will go from the neckline over to the armhole, and you keep that as straight as possible. We only need to do one side because we're going to draft one and then trace over to the other side. So at this point, anything that we're doing is only on the doll's left, the left side of the doll, our left, her right. Now we need to mark the quarters, okay, and I find a point, I use enough yarn that will cover both the front and fold over to the back. I find the midpoint on the shoulder. I bring it to the most extreme point on her bust, middle of the way here on the waist, and the same thing between the center and the midpoint of the center and the hip. I guess I could move this over just a tiny bit. Same thing with the back. This will come down, it will meet about halfway there, and then it will come halfway when I'm done to the waist, and then dissect midpoint at the hips. Okay, in the back, this will fall at midpoint between the center back and the side, and again between the center back and the side at the waist, and again between the center back and the hip point there on the hip line. And what these lines are going to do is princess lines for those fitted garments, as well as lines that my dart is going to fall, my bust dart, waist bust dart there, and of course the darts that will form coming from the waist to the hips for skirts or trousers. Okay, same thing in the back. Okay, and with that, with the exception of our sleeve, which we'll do later, for our top and our skirt slopers, we've marked the doll completely.
In part 2, we will create a basic bodice sloper.